Good evening, everybody. We had a fantastic online discussion. I want to thank everyone that participated. Hopefully you had the same experience in the room. We started off our discussion as a group in one room, talking about all four topics. And the first topic we talked about was strategy. Vlad, can you just remind us of the question for strategy?
Where are we and where do we need to be?
Excellent. So our view was that, and David and Daniel, who are in this room as well, feel free to jump in, but our view was that from a strategy standpoint, we felt that there was a lack of buy-in from the C level. There's a lack of understanding around data and the importance of data. We thought that that data governance, there was especially within potentially government and some of the larger organizations, there's a conflict between potentially the understanding of data breach in terms of cybersecurity versus data governance. We didn't think that there was enough business alignment, and we thought that the risks and audit teams needed to have this as part of their remit. In addition to that, we're seeing not enough of what we call a capability maturity assessment being done within organizations, not just on the capability around technology, but also around where to start and who are the people that need to be involved in and those sorts of things as well. David, do you want to add anything else there?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary, I think, Brad. A couple other things that I noted was, is actually how you actually get it onto the agenda for the executive, for the C-suite. And we talked about, identifying issues such as risk and value of data.
Yeah, good points. I guess the next one for us was all about methodology. And the question there was, Vlad, I think, was it, do we want to go heavy or do we want to go light? And I think everyone agreed that we need to be iterative. We need to show value. We need to make sure that we're again aligned to the business priorities and not just do this as a big bang approach. We also need to find similarities across lines of businesses. So, if there's a common data element or critical data element for multiple lines of businesses, we should start there and show value and push on. They're the main ones that I've got. We also talked a little bit about scale, and you can't just throw people at this. There has to be some level of automation there to help you grow and prove out data governance in the longer term, and there must be some productivity benefits associated with this, as well as broader outcome-focused benefits, such as not just risk, but also customer experience, digital experience, ability to share data, and those sorts of things. So, David, do you want to comment any further on those items?
Possibly, other thing that came in place is adding methodology to implement it. It's really got to get that engagement by all the key stakeholders in there.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I think the third one that we talked about was what are the metrics, and how do you show value? I think that's the third one there, and I think the question there was, how do we make this fun? I think it's change management is what we're talking about here. How do we make change management fun? And David brought up an interesting conversation that he and Daniel have around looking at ChatGPT, earlier on in research for this, and that ChatGPT actually suggested gamification as one way of making this fun in terms of change management. Someone brought up the idea of, and I think it was again either David or Charles who mentioned, understanding the motivation to commence a program like this is important to make it fun as well. And if you don't have the motivation, then there may be creating a crisis, similar to Optus or Medibanks can actually build stimulus to get people involved and make it fun. Daniel Hyde put up a nice solution, which was an analogy around a plane. How does a plane work? And I'm not sure really all the concepts around it, but really was saying what are all the inputs to make a plane work, and then tailor that to a governance approach. So what are all the inputs to make governance work, and apply that to some fun some project like getting a plane up and running, which I thought was an interesting concept, and I'd probably like Daniel just to maybe expand on that.
Yes, absolutely. So we spoke about how we can get buy-in for the business, top down, bottom up as well. So anyway, it's hard. It's an organization effort to implement the governance. We need help from everyone. And using stories, setting the vision is key. So then I use an analogy about where we're gonna fly. We're gonna fly somewhere that has a trip, and then there are lots of things that are necessary. So we need a flight map, right, for the pilot, etc. And that's basically understanding the organization data landscape. And then you have to fill the tank. Of course, that's getting the data to fill our mission. After that, we have to familiarize ourselves with the cockpit, the instruments. It's about understanding the data, classifying the meaning, the terms of use, etc. We have to test the equipment. It's about profiling data, understand if I have data quality or not. We have to do safety checks. Is my data protected? Who's gonna consume that? Who can consume that? And then, of course, the autopilot. When you fly, the pilot's not there all the time, manage that plane. So there are lots of things that happen automatically. What can we automate? It's about bringing AI, automation, analytic models to your strategy. And finally, just wrapping up is you're gonna load your plane. That's the cargo, that's the people. They're gonna fly to that destination. That's basically setting up what I believe is the most critical component. That's how people are gonna consume data, like a data storefront, a data marketplace. That's the key there, enabling business users without technical skills to consume data securely. And when we do that, now we can take off. We have democratized data, and we're gonna achieve our destination. Of course, they're gonna resonate in business outcomes, growth, better customer experience, better employee experience, and so on. So that's an analogy I used.
I thought it was a great analogy, Daniel, and one that I think that you could put outside, a lift, as you go up in a building, and maybe make that almost like a comic or an animation to help people understand the importance of data governance. So I thought that was a great approach around change management. Others talked about, I think Fernando and Brenda talked about, you're already doing this already. We're just trying to formalize the approach. So make it easy and simple for people to understand that this is already in place. We just need to make sure that you're seeing benefit from it and by formalizing it, and maybe formalizing it by design, so it's not coming at the end of a project or an end of initiative and those sorts of things. And then Joe put on a great story around one of the financial institutions that are using onboarding as an approach to change management, where whenever someone comes into an organization, their onboarding process takes care of data management 101. We're not to put 999s into a CRM screen and those sorts of things. So again, another good story to talk about as well. The last question was around performance, and we talked about what are the metrics to show value. I think one of the things we've noted in the keynote, while it was sensational, we were really itching for the metrics that could show value from data governance, and so I think the team came up with some good ones. David, you talked about reducing risk, reducing costs, reducing administration, understanding the value, monetizing data to a certain extent. Brenda talked about multiple handling, of data. How many people are actually handling data to get to the outcome that they need, and is that a productivity metric that we need to keep in mind? And are decisions being made by data? I think that was another one that came up, which was really good. Or how many decisions are being actually made that are driven by data? And if they're not, then clearly we aren't doing a good job from a governance standpoint. And then obviously, I think Joe, you also talked about data quality framework and data quality metrics. The standard, the performance of the actual data quality within the business as well, which is really important. And overall, my view on this is that we should be also building out almost like an insurance policy where you have demographic information and maybe coming up with a central score across all of these metrics based on how we're performing against each one of these individual ones that we've identified. There's plenty more, but they're the ones that we came up with a short period of time. David, Brenda, Joe, any others that we didn't capture there?
No.
No, I think you've covered it really well, Brad. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. That's it from us, Vlad, and
I guess that, yeah, so we did have a little bit of a discussion around the AI, right? And as well, and the, how you could apply it to data governance, from that would be helping with the automation when we were looking at, to be able to scale, to be able to, tag automatically metadata classification, that type of thing in the data, being able to understand, back to models. If you start looking at modeling and that's being used, are those models actually being promoted, operationalized? If not, then there's got to be queries around, you would expect, both the validity of the models themselves, but likely the data that's also being used in those models. So to be able to review that and have a better understanding of where the questions are for the data that's feeding the models.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think also Charles brought up this idea of data usage. Who is using the data, and if it's not being used, then should we be continuing to govern it and those sorts of things. So the idea of taking away spreadsheets from people and seeing who screams was another good example around that. So yeah.
No worries. Thank you, group. So we're now going to ask, we'll start with strategy. So Andrew.
Alan, and what I'll do is I'll build on some of the comments that were made by the online group.
But can you just come closer so they can hear you online as well?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So look, a couple of points that we made in the rotational groups were, in Australian government, we're probably between 0 and 1 in terms of maturity. That level 5 maturity metrics that was discussed at the introductory discussion. Not 1 to 2 as is in the United States. 4 to 5 will always be the kind of the North Star. It will always be aspirational and probably non-achievable, other than that H3 this year will be H2 next year, which will be, we'll have another new H3 after the year after that. So perfection, while always a good goal, we're never going to probably get there. The other thing was there was fundamental agreement around incremental implementation as being the right approach. The problem with a big bang approach to introduction of data governance is that it is either abstract, it's taking too long to deliver the benefits realization, and it will be subject to budget cuts when the organization faces financial constraints. But it's very hard to take an agile approach to data governance. Operationalization is always going to be the next step that requires us to move out of kind of proving concepts or prototyping or small scale introduction into business as usual, and having data governance as something that everybody inside the organization pursues, not just us so-called specialists. So we were thinking about, there are lots of AI ops and ML ops and dev ops. Well, there should be maybe a DG ops, but I've got a trademark on that, so that's mine. we need a data strategy before we go into a data governance strategy. Well, we actually need to have a line of sight to the organizational strategy. So what is data governance as a body of work, as a set of activities, as a process, and as an objective, doing about how is it contributing to what is that line of sight to the overall organizational objective? There was some conversation around, well, accountability for data governance. Governance is about responsibility and accountability. Who within the organization, whether it be a senior executive or the person at the front line, who is accountable for how data is governed, and how do we make sure that that accountability is being monitored and managed? How do we make sure that the risk with poor data governance is understood by somebody at the front counter, to the who has the face-to-face with the customer, as it is to the CEO, the CFO, or the COO? The other thing that we said is there's a danger with taking an abstract view to data governance. Better practice, where consultants come in and say, here are your 3 tiers, this is the accountabilities that should be in play, this is related to the DMBOK, or this is part of Dharma, this is part of the Data Governance Institute, etc. It needs to be something that is practical, realizable, and that once the consultants leave, becomes embedded in business. The other thing that we discussed was around, who do we compare ourselves to when we are thinking about better practice, particularly inside government? Where do we get lessons learned about how methodologies have either succeeded, partially succeeded, or failed elsewhere? And how do we make sure that we don't make the same mistakes going forward? Somebody came out with the expression, and I love this one: data culture eats data strategy for breakfast. So data governance culture eats data governance strategy for breakfast. If we don't get that promulgation of data governance good practice throughout the organization, who cares about the strategy? You failed. We also spoke about how lots of organizations have good corporate and business strategic thinkers who are saying, where are we in the business and where do we need to be? Well, how come these folks aren't being used also in terms of data governance? So just as, for example, in the Department of Defence, when you plan an engagement, you have everything planned out. Mind you, it might not survive the first contact with the enemy, but you do bring your best minds into play to be able to work out where are the risks, what are the contingencies, how are you going to react to things that may be part of the fog of war. The other things we spoke about was how that equation about what this means for everybody inside the organization is, what is the risk of getting things wrong? And I love the analogy about the aircraft. An air traffic controller, I imagine their data quality parameters are a lot more refined and understood than maybe somebody who's managing HR inside an organization, right? The data that they're governing. So in some organizations, if you get it wrong, well, somebody spoke about in defense when you've got coordinates to bring fire to bear. If you get the blue dots confused with the red dots, you're going to be in trouble. And the other thing was, and this is I think from John Gray, was the causal links between data quality and tangible outcomes and effects are very important. So if you are in the corporate side of business, maybe it is more abstract than if you are in parts of the business that is at the coalface and where the implications of not having your data governance right is going to bite you in the butt.
Thank you, Henry. The next table is about methodology. Richard?
Yeah. I'll carry on with the theme of really talking about the things that maybe we want to emphasize and haven't been mentioned. I think a big thing initially was just the requirement for data literacy, and particularly in senior decision-making roles, and how weak it is both in government and the commercial sector. We sort of felt a bit defeated by that topic, but it is just an ongoing requirement. We talked about the concept of, while businesses and government are used to the concept of business partners from IT supporting business units, this idea that data partners or business data partners supporting business units to help them increase literacy and engagement. I think we unanimously voted on, or I think we did, that all future data governance projects will start light, and that MVP style single use case that can be well proven out, return on effort, return on investment. And then we just kind of talked around, don't start unless you've got that funding and support in place, which Natalie Greenwood spoke about. And we spoke a fair bit about intentionality, the why, using Simon Sinek's, a very famous line, clarity of outcomes and that maturity cycle. So that's what we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Change management. Adam.
So we generally, on tables as they roll through, generally felt that we really need to focus on cultural change and political change over change management of any particular tools. We really need to make sure it connects to how people are going to use the tools and what benefit they're going to get from them. And as they see benefit, they'll understand how their life will become easier from participating in using the tools. There's a lot in that. There's a lot of need to analyse the as is, so people will understand how their day-to-day will change as they participate in this data governance process. There needs to be sort of maybe not necessarily firm, but guidelines, rules to how they engage. Need to make sure we cater for reactive changes to people's business processes and their day-to-day governance of data. And there was a great quote offered, which is, don't waste a good crisis. Let people understand that, amongst the panic, they could lead to increased capability if they participate in these processes. So one of the big interesting things that was brought up is the generational communication differences and how different generations respond quite differently to the change within them, particularly when it comes to their day-to-day processes. A lot of different groups of people really need time to digest changes, whereas others will just roll with it. So we need to make sure there's a clear path of change offered in that change management, and time for people to actually accept that change. They can't just front up one day and get told, okay, so some industries will happily do as they're told the next day, others will need to understand the change before they can participate.
I'm Sam. And Ryan. Performance.
We had some wonderful discussions. Thank you to everybody for the participation. I'm very data rich, so I've got to try and turn this into information. So we talk about data governance performance, which was a fascinating topic. I came into it, I must admit, with a certain lens, and then my mind was somewhat blown. So could you just little higher? That's much better. My challenge was to talk about AI and how it could improve the performance of data governance. How do we measure it? How do we validate and justify its investment? And then where to from here? And I think we talked about some things kind of around it, but the most important thing, and it was great to hear, particularly from the strategy table, was the most important thing about measuring the performance of data governance and improving the performance of data governance was actually making sure that the data governance was measurable. And that it had a clear purpose, and we all sort of felt like it needed to be tied to the business goals and objectives, and that is probably the best way to demonstrate its value to the organisation. Is if your organisation's goal is to extract as much money from the taxpayers' pockets as possible, not looking at anyone, then your data governance should be structured around that. We won't go into the defence context. We also felt it should be baked into everyday process, but then there was this really interesting conversation around, well, what if it slows everything down? But if the value of that is greater than the performance hit, then that's obviously clearly kind of justifiable. So with the change hat on, yes, people will complain that it might take longer to produce the report for the minister, but did you actually give the minister the correct information? is probably quite important as well. We talked around a lot of things, but I think your data governance needs to be pragmatic and priority based on value and risk, which was a really cool one. We talked a lot about acceptable use. So really interesting use case. Is it okay to share that data with this other stakeholder? That's a really fantastic question. And I think one of the cool things that came out of that maybe AI and automation could impact on, well, how do you pull that data apart? How do you merge it with other data sources to perhaps tease out the sorts of things that you don't want people to find? And then that can help you answer the question about whether you should or shouldn't share that data with those stakeholders. But largely, the consensus across AI was to introduce some feedback loops, to look at the data and to augment the people and decision-making process rather than to replace it. And like I said, that red team, blue team was a fascinating conversation. But clearly, if you're reporting on the same issues when it comes to data governance and you don't do anything about it, then you're never going to improve your data governance. So feedback loops, again, sort of were really important and a really important key to success. So if you're looking for how to justify the value to your organizations and demonstrate value to your data governance, I think tying it to the business goals and objectives and tying it and showing how you're improving the situation over time and issues you are having are going away and maybe you're experiencing new ones, that's a really great way to show the value.